I found the photograph at a flea market in rural Iowa. It was a Sunday in June, one of those bright summer mornings when the cornfields stretch endlessly under a vast blue sky and the air smells of earth and growing things. The flea market was held in a barn outside a small town whose population couldn't have exceeded 500 people. Most vendors were selling the usual: old farm equipment, vintage kitchenware, quilts, furniture. But one elderly woman had a table covered with old photographs, tintypes, and daguerreotypes, most of them anonymous images separated long ago from the families they depicted. I was browsing through a box of tintypes when I found it. A large tintype, perhaps 6 by 8 inches, showing a family of 6. The image quality was remarkably good, the figures sharp and clear despite the photograph's age. The composition was typical of 1870s family photography. A bearded father sat at center left, wearing a dark suit with a bow tie. Beside him sat the mother, wearing a dark dress with a white collar and what appeared to be a brooch or pendant. Behind them stood a tall teenage boy, and around them were arranged 3 other children: a girl in a plaid dress on the left, another boy on the right, and a younger girl seated in front of her mother. What struck me immediately was the mother's expression. While everyone else in the photograph maintained the serious, composed expressions typical of long photographic exposures, the mother's face showed something different. Her eyes had a quality that was hard to define, not quite defiance, but a kind of grim determination. And her hand, resting on the shoulder of the young girl in front of her, was clenched into a fist. The vendor noticed my interest. "That's the Henriksen family," she said, "from right here in Grundy County. My great-aunt left me a whole box of old family things when she died. I'm just trying to find homes for them all." "Do you know anything about them?" I asked. "Not much. Norwegian immigrants, I think, farmers. The usual story for this area. But I remember my great-aunt saying there was some kind of tragedy with that family. Can't recall the details, though." On the back of the tintype's protective case, in faded pencil, was written, "Henriksen Family, Grundy County, Iowa, October 1878. Lars, Greta, and children." And below that, in different handwriting, "Mother hanged for murder. November 1878. See County Trial Records." My heart started racing. I bought the tintype for $20, along with a small bundle of papers the vendor said had been with it. Letters, newspaper clippings, and what appeared to be pages from a diary. That evening in my hotel room, I spread everything out and began to piece together the story. What I discovered was both horrifying and heartbreaking. The newspaper clipping was from the Grundy County Herald, dated November 15th, 1878. Shocking murder in rural township. Farmer's wife confesses to poisoning husband. Mrs. Greta Henriksen, 38, has been arrested and charged with the murder of her husband, Mr. Lars Henriksen, 42, who died on the night of October 20th, 1878, at their farm 6 miles northeast of town. Mr. Henriksen's death was initially believed to be from natural causes, a sudden heart failure or stroke. However, several circumstances aroused the suspicion of Dr. William Patterson, who had been called to attend to Mr. Henriksen in his final hours. Upon examination, Dr. Patterson noted symptoms inconsistent with heart disease, including severe abdominal pain, vomiting, and convulsions. He requested permission from the county sheriff to perform an autopsy, which revealed evidence suggesting arsenic poisoning. When confronted by Sheriff Morrison, Mrs. Henriksen confessed to having poisoned her husband's evening meal on October 20th. She stated that she had obtained arsenic, commonly used for pest control on farms, and had mixed it into her husband's food that evening. Mrs. Henriksen has been taken into custody and is being held at the county jail pending trial. The couple's 5 children are currently in the care of relatives. The case has shocked the community. The Henriksens were known as a hard-working farm family, and no one suspected any trouble in the household. Neighbors describe being stunned by these revelations. I continued reading through the materials. There were more newspaper clippings documenting the trial, which had taken place in December 1878 and lasted only 3 days. The verdict was guilty. The sentence was death by hanging, but it was the diary pages that told the real story. They were written in a mixture of English and what I later determined was Norwegian, in small, precise handwriting. The pages were dated and chronicled several years of Greta Henriksen's life. I found a Norwegian translator to help me with portions I couldn't read, and over the following weeks I pieced together Greta's story from her diary entries. From July 1876, Lars struck me again today. He says I do not work hard enough, that the house is not clean enough, that the children are too noisy. Nothing I do pleases him. He does not strike me where others can see. Always the body, never the face. He has learned to be careful about that. The children are frightened of him. Little Anna cries when she hears his footsteps. The boys have learned to make themselves scarce when he is in one of his moods. Only Kari, the oldest, sometimes dares to stand up to him. She will pay for that defiance someday. I do not know how much longer I can endure this life, but what choice do I have? I am his wife. The law gives him authority over me. The church says I must submit to him. And I have 5 children who depend on me. From March 1877, Lars beat Thomas today. The boy is only 12 years old. His crime was that he did not finish his chores quickly enough. Lars used his belt, striking the boy again and again until Thomas collapsed on the floor. I tried to intervene. I begged Lars to stop. He turned on me instead, striking me across the face. The first time he has struck me where others might see. I have a black eye and a split lip. Tomorrow we must go to church. I do not know how I will explain my injuries. I suppose I will say I fell. That is what wives always say, isn't it? I am beginning to understand that this will never stop. Lars will never change. He will continue to beat me and the children until one of us is seriously injured or killed. And no one will stop him, because he is the husband, the father, the head of the household. The law protects him. Society protects him. God, apparently, protects him. Who protects us? From August 1878, I have been thinking about death lately. Not my own death. I have thought about that for years, wished for it even, as a release from this life. But Lars's death. What would happen if he died? Would we be free? Would the children and I finally be able to live without fear? I know it is sinful to think such thoughts. I know a wife should not wish for her husband's death, but I cannot help it. Every time he raises his hand to strike me, every time I hear him beating one of the children, I think, if only he were gone. There are ways it could happen. Farming is dangerous work. Accidents occur. Men fall from barn lofts, are trampled by horses, are caught in machinery. But such accidents are unreliable, and I do not know if I could arrange one without being discovered. There are other ways. Sickness, poison. I am shocked by my own thoughts. What kind of woman thinks about murdering her husband? What kind of mother plans such things? But then Lars strikes one of the children again, and I think, what kind of mother allows her children to live in terror? What kind of woman does nothing to protect them? From October 15th, 1878, Lars has decided we will have a family photograph made. He wants to document our prosperity, to show that we are a respectable family. We will go to town next week to visit the photographer. I will sit beside him in that photograph. I will sit there with my children, and we will all pretend to be a normal family. The camera will capture us looking dignified and proper. But I will know the truth. I will know what happens in our home, away from the camera and the photographer and the watching world. I have made a decision. I cannot write it here explicitly, in case anyone ever reads this diary. But I have decided that Lars's violence must end. I have decided that my children deserve to live without fear. The photograph will be taken on October 20th. I have chosen that date deliberately. Let there be a record of us all together one final time. Let there be evidence that we existed as a family before everything changes. From October 20th, 1878, we had the photograph made today. All 6 of us dressed in our best clothes and went to the photographer in town. Lars wanted to look prosperous and respectable. He wanted to project the image of a successful farmer with a well-ordered family. I sat beside him and placed my hand on Anna's shoulder. I looked at the camera and thought, remember this. Document this moment, because everything is about to change. The children sensed something. I could see it in their faces. Thomas looked wary. Eric looked uncertain. Carrie, standing behind her father, looked almost hopeful, as if she knew something was coming. We returned home in the wagon. Lars was in a good mood, pleased with how the photograph session had gone. He talked about having the image framed, about displaying it in our home. I prepared supper: potatoes, bread, bacon, simple fare. And in Lars's portion, I mixed the arsenic I had been saving. Not too much. I had read that too much causes immediate vomiting, and I wanted to be certain he consumed enough to be fatal. He ate it all. He complained that the food was bland, that I should have seasoned it better. But he ate it all. Now it is evening. The children are in bed. Lars has begun to complain of stomach pain. He thinks it is indigestion. He does not know he is dying. I should feel guilt. I should feel horror at what I have done. But all I feel is relief and hope that it will work, that he will die, that we will finally be free. If anyone ever reads this, they will think me a monster. Perhaps I am, but I am a monster created by circumstances, by a system that gave me no other way to protect my children. I killed my husband. I poisoned him. And I am not sorry. That was the last diary entry. The remaining pages were blank. I found trial transcripts in the Grundy County Courthouse archives. They painted a grim picture of the proceedings. Greta had confessed immediately when confronted by the sheriff. She had not tried to deny what she'd done. She had explained calmly that she had poisoned Lars because he had been violent toward her and the children for years, and she saw no other way to protect them. The prosecution argued that Greta was a calculating murderer who had deliberately planned and executed her husband's death. They presented the diary as evidence of premeditation. They argued that if she had been in genuine danger, she should have sought help from authorities or left the marriage. The defense, such as it was, provided by an inexperienced attorney who seemed uncomfortable representing a woman accused of murdering her husband, argued that Greta had acted to protect herself and her children from ongoing violence. They presented testimony from neighbors who had occasionally witnessed Lars's violent temper, but the legal reality was stark. A wife had no legal right to kill her husband, regardless of circumstances. Self-defense required imminent danger, and poisoning a meal did not qualify as self-defense. The law provided no exception for battered women who killed their abusers. From the closing arguments, prosecutor: Gentlemen of the jury, the facts of this case are not in dispute. Mrs. Henriksen has confessed to deliberately poisoning her husband. She planned this murder for weeks, perhaps months. She obtained poison, she concealed it, she waited for an opportune moment, and she executed her plan. She claims her husband was violent. Perhaps he was. Perhaps he was a difficult man, a stern disciplinarian, but that does not give her the right to murder him. If she truly feared for her safety, she had options. She could have left. She could have sought help from neighbors, from the church, from legal authorities. Instead, she chose murder. She chose to poison a man's food and watch him die in agony. And she has shown no remorse. This was not self-defense. This was not an accident. This was cold-blooded, premeditated murder. The law is clear about how such crimes must be punished. Defense: Gentlemen, Mrs. Henriksen does not deny that she caused her husband's death. She has been forthright about her actions. But I ask you to consider the circumstances that led to those actions. Mrs. Henriksen endured years of violence at her husband's hands. She watched him beat her children. She lived in constant fear, and she had nowhere to turn. The law gave her husband authority over her. Society told her to submit to him. The church told her marriage was sacred and indissoluble. What was she to do? Where was she to go? With 5 children and no independent means, she could not simply leave. The authorities would not have intervened. A man's treatment of his wife and children was considered a private family matter. She saw her children suffering and made a desperate choice to protect them. Was it right? Perhaps not. Was it legal? No. But was it understandable? I submit to you that it was. Mrs. Henriksen is not a monster. She is a mother who felt she had no other way to protect her children from a violent man. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. The verdict: guilty of murder in the first degree. The sentence: death by hanging. Greta Henriksen was executed on January 10th, 1879, less than 3 months after the photograph was taken. She was 38 years old. I found a newspaper account of the execution. Mrs. Henriksen hanged for murder of husband. Mrs. Sko. Greta Henriksen was executed by hanging this morning at the county jail. She was convicted in December of poisoning her husband, Lars Henriksen, in October of last year. Mrs. Henriksen maintained her composure throughout the ordeal. When asked if she had any final words, she said only, "I did what I had to do to protect my children. May God forgive me if I was wrong." A crowd of approximately 100 people gathered to witness the execution. Mrs. Henriksen was pronounced dead at 10:47 a.m. Her body will be buried in the county cemetery. Her 5 children remain in the care of relatives. I spent months researching what happened to the Henriksen children after their mother's execution. The story was heartbreaking. The children were separated and sent to live with different relatives. Kari, the oldest daughter, was sent to live with Lars's brother in Minnesota. She later wrote a letter that survived in family papers, describing her uncle as just like father was, harsh and violent. Thomas, the oldest son, ran away from his relative's home at age 14 and disappeared from the historical record. I found no further trace of him. Eric, the middle son, was apprenticed to a blacksmith and apparently had a relatively stable life. He married, had children, but died young. At 32, cause of death listed as melancholia, depression or suicide in modern terms. The two youngest children, Anna and baby Sina, who I realized must have been very small in the photograph, were adopted by a family in a different county. They apparently had better lives than their older siblings, though neither ever spoke publicly about their parents. I also found that there had been some public discussion of Greta's case, particularly among early women's rights advocates. Several newspapers published letters arguing that the case demonstrated the need for legal reforms to protect women from violent husbands. From a letter published in the Des Moines Register in February 1879, the execution of Mrs. Henriksen should shock the conscience of every citizen of this state. This woman endured years of violence at her husband's hands. She watched him beat her children. And when she finally acted to protect them, the law offered her no defense, and society showed her no mercy. Yes, she killed her husband. But her husband was killing her and her children slowly, through years of violence. The law did nothing to protect her. Society told her to endure. When a woman has no legal recourse, when the law gives her husband absolute authority over her, when she cannot leave and cannot seek help, what is she to do? Must she simply wait until he kills her or one of her children? Mrs. Henriksen made a terrible choice, but it was a choice forced upon her by a legal system that treats women as property and gives men unlimited power over their families. Her blood is on our hands, all of us who maintain a system that offers women no protection and no escape from violent marriages. But these voices were in the minority. Most public commentary condemned Greta as a murderer who had gotten what she deserved. I decided to write a comprehensive account of the Henriksen case, using the photograph, Greta's diary, and the trial records to tell the story of how domestic violence, legal powerlessness, and social attitudes toward women could combine to create a tragedy. The book was titled The Final Photograph, Greta Henriksen and the Impossible Choice in 1878 Iowa. Writing it was emotionally devastating. I spent months immersed in Greta's diary, reading her accounts of abuse, her growing desperation, her careful planning of her husband's murder, reading the trial transcripts where her suffering was dismissed and her actions condemned, reading about her execution, and looking at that photograph taken on October 20th, 1878, the same day she poisoned Lars's meal. Looking at her expression, seeing that grim determination, understanding that she was sitting for that photograph, knowing what she was about to do. The book was published by a university press and generated intense discussion. Some readers argued that Greta was indeed a murderer who deserved her punishment, that regardless of circumstances, killing is wrong, and the law must be applied equally. But many others saw Greta's case as an example of how legal and social systems can fail women so completely that violence becomes their only option for survival and protecting their children. I received hundreds of letters in response to the book. Many were from people who recognized patterns of domestic violence in their own family histories. Some were from legal scholars discussing how domestic violence law has evolved since the 19th century. And some were from descendants of the Henriksen family. One letter particularly moved me. It was from Kari Henriksen's great-granddaughter. Dear Dr. Morrison, thank you for telling my great-great-grandmother's story with such care and compassion. Growing up, I knew only the family legend, that my great-great-grandmother had been hanged for murder, and that we didn't talk about it. It was treated as a shameful secret, something to be hidden. Your book helped me understand what really happened. Greta Henriksen was not a monster. She was a woman trapped in an impossible situation, trying to protect her children from a violent man. The tragedy is that she had no legal recourse. If she had been able to leave Lars, if the law had protected her, if society had offered her any support, she wouldn't have needed to poison him. She could have saved herself and her children without becoming a murderer. Instead, she was forced to choose between continuing to endure violence or committing murder. And when she chose to protect her children, society executed her for it. I've looked at that photograph many times since reading your book. Now I see it differently. I see a woman preparing to commit murder, not because she was evil, but because she saw no other way to save her children. I see her sitting beside the man she was about to kill, maintaining the appearance of normal family life one final time. I see the children who are about to lose both parents, their father to poison, their mother to the hangman's noose. The photograph looks so ordinary, but it captures an extraordinary moment. The last time this family would all be together, taken on the day that would destroy them all. Thank you for ensuring that Greta's story is remembered, not as the tale of an evil woman who murdered her husband, but as the tragedy of a woman who had no other choice. Sincerely, Rachel Henriksen Morrison. The photograph of the Henriksen family now hangs in my study, displayed alongside excerpts from Greta's diary and trial testimony. Together, they tell the complete story of a family destroyed by violence and by a legal system that offered no protection to its victims. I look at that photograph often. Lars Henriksen sits there looking stern and authoritative, unaware that in a few hours he will be dying of arsenic poisoning. Greta sits beside him, her hand clenched on her daughter's shoulder, her expression showing grim determination. The children are arranged around them, Kari standing behind her father, looking almost hopeful, Thomas looking wary, Eric uncertain, and the two younger girls still innocent of what is about to happen. The photograph was taken on October 20th, 1878. That evening, Lars Henriksen ate the meal his wife had prepared. He began experiencing symptoms around 8 o'clock and was dead by midnight. Greta was arrested on November 12th, tried in December, and hanged on January 10th, 1879. Less than 3 months from the taking of this photograph to Greta's execution. 3 months that destroyed a family completely. The photograph looked ordinary. It showed exactly what a farm family should look like. A hard-working father, a dutiful mother, well-dressed children. It projected respectability, normalcy, proper family structure. But it captured something else. A moment of decision. A woman who had just arranged to have her family's photograph taken before committing murder. Children who were about to lose both parents. a family in its final hours of existing together. Greta knew this when she sat for the portrait. She had planned it deliberately, the photograph and the murder on the same day. She wanted there to be a record. She wanted evidence that they had been a family before everything fell apart. Looking at her expression in the photograph, I believe she was trying to communicate something across time. The same thing she tried to communicate in her diary, in her confession, in her final words before execution. I did what I had to do. Was she right? Was murder the only way to protect her children? The historical record suggests it might have been. In 1878, Iowa, women had almost no legal rights within marriage. Domestic violence was not considered a crime. It was viewed as a private family matter. Women could not easily obtain divorces. They had limited economic opportunities. Police and courts rarely intervened in domestic situations. Greta Henriksen was trapped by law, custom, religion, and economic reality. She saw her children suffering and made a choice that she believed would free them. She was wrong about one thing. Her death did not free her children. It traumatized them further. They lost their mother to the hangman and were scattered to relatives, some of whom were as violent as their father had been. The tragedy is that Greta's sacrifice accomplished nothing. She killed Lars to protect her children, but in doing so, she ensured her own death and left them orphaned and vulnerable. That's what makes the photograph so haunting. It captures a moment of hope. Greta believing that by killing Lars, she could save her children. But we know how the story ends. We know that within 3 months, both parents will be dead, and the children will be separated and traumatized. The photograph looked ordinary, but it documented the last hours before murder, before execution, before a family was utterly destroyed. May Greta Henriksen's memory be honored not as a murderess, but as a woman who made an impossible choice in impossible circumstances. May Lars Henriksen be remembered as a violent man whose abuse created the tragedy that destroyed his family. And may the Henriksen children, scattered and traumatized, have found some peace in their lives. The photograph remains, ordinary on its surface, extraordinary when you know its story. A family portrait taken hours before the mother poisoned the father's meal. A final record of 6 people who would never all be together again. Greta sat for that photograph knowing she was about to commit murder. She looked at the camera with determination, creating a record of a moment she had chosen to be their last as a complete family. The photograph looked ordinary, but it captured a woman preparing to kill, children about to be orphaned, a family in its final hours of existence. That's the truth preserved in this image from October 20th, 1878. That's the story that Greta Henriksen's diary and the trial records reveal. An ordinary family portrait that documented an extraordinary tragedy. A mother who killed her husband to protect her children and was hanged for it. A moment frozen in time, just hours before everything fell apart. The photograph looked ordinary, until you learned what happened that same night.